Hello ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another review. Donspektor here today with another review, and I have for you the extremely hype TANGZU Heyday edition in cooperation with Bad Guy Audio. And in today's review we will be finding out if this thing is actually worth the extreme hype it got or not, and what I think from it on basically every level. And as usual, I'll be starting off with packaging and accessories and unboxing. So that's the box. You get this fancy art on here. You slide it out like that. Get to inside here, and you have this like metallic TANGZU on here, which you can open with a magnet. And then you directly get presented with the IEM and the carrying case. And as you can see again, carrying case, huge boy. So let's take a quick look at that. That's the case. And it's pretty big, as you can see. Has a golden zipper, like very reflective gold. You can even see it here. Collecting fingerprints like hell. And unfortunately not the smoothest to open. So that definitively has potential for improvement. Other potential I see, this is not the most sturdy case, as you can see here. Like, it is easily squished. However, if you open it, this is a nice interior here. It's soft and like plushy. And it has, again, an additional net here. And beneath here are the connectors, which we take a look later on when we look at the cable. And then we have this construction around here, which has like a square shape on the inside. It's made to be like wrapped around with the cable. And you would put your IEM in here and here to prevent them from bonking together and scratching or anything to happen. So that's a nice idea. And also execution here is pretty decent, I want to say. My main issue with this whole thing though is, do you really take the time and wrap the cable around whenever you pack it in? Most of the time, probably not. So I think a better idea would have been to just make it like kind of two compartmentalized with a small thing in the middle. So you just flop everything in here on one side, and there's another department here with a small separator in the middle that prevents your IEMs from bonking together. Because this nobody does in real life, or at least I have not done it like once when I used the IEM for the few weeks I have had it now. But if you have the time, like, this is at least nicely constructed. And yeah, that's the carrying case, and then in our packaging, here's the IEM. This thing is not removable, it's glued on there. And if we remove that, then we come to the bottom here. And as you can see, we get a decent selection of tips. This would be foam tips. Because my unit is used, it doesn't come with foams, like it's from a friend. And again, thank my friend here for borrowing it to me. And then here we have balance tips, which have like a wider outlet, bass enhanced tips, which have a smaller outlet, and we have L, M, and S. And yeah, the S tips actually here are relatively small, so that's nice to see, and I like the inclusion of foams as well. Small improvement suggestion would be shrink the packaging a bit, shrink the carrying case a bit, then you can use less packaging, and you can keep a similar style of presentation here. And also the foams, it would just be one size, like maybe put an S and M, because yeah, usually the M foam tips are pretty big, and I at least can't fit them in my ear, and yeah, I think quite a few other people have the same issue. So yeah, that's about the packaging accessories. There isn't much more included. Overall, this presentation is nice, and I also like the art style here, because that's not the classic anime or whatever that everybody tries to print on for whatever reason. This is at least a bit more unique, and yeah, looks like well drawn. And then next, let's take a look at the IEM before we look at the cable. And you can already see my first point of critique when we look at the IEM build. This is very shiny, and like other IEMs, it's an extreme fingerprint magnet. You can see here, I just touched it once. I actually polished it before this review. Immediately fingerprint, and it's always the case with this thing. It collects fingerprint like it's among the worst offenders I've seen. Maybe in the same line as the HC hard mirror, which was also catastrophic fingerprint magnet. So yeah. And yeah, but when we stay with faceplate here, let's take a look at the actual pattern, because that is also unique. It's like squiggly lines. I think it's Chinese inspired, I'm not entirely sure. Fortunately, I don't know enough about Chinese culture to know what this is supposed to entail or not. But this is definitely unique, and yeah, the faceplate is, as most other metal IEMs, a two-piece design here. So let's see if you can see it here. So we have the faceplate as like metal part 1, and then you have the other part of the shell, which all of the inside, including the nozzle, as part 2. And actually the seams here are pretty nice. You can see the seam is very small, barely visible to the camera, and if I go over here with my finger, basically do not notice it at all. And it's also very even all around, and even my fingernail can barely feel it here. So that's a very good execution of a two-piece metal shell design here, and don't have too many complaints here. On top of the IEM is the 2-pin connector, which is not color matched, and as you can see, ever so slightly dented in. So keep that in mind. If you use some not too great 2-pin cables that are flush, this could be a small issue, ever so small, because it's like maybe 0.5 millimeter or so. This is like inverted, but I just want to mention it here. Also on top we have 2 pressure holes, which probably also are used for tuning, and those have an filter paper on the inside, or like a filter mesh, which prevents dirt from getting in and maybe helps with tuning, at least I assume so. And yeah, that's nice, so your dirt doesn't get in from this side. I like that inclusion. And on the other side, yep, you can see there's the R marking. And actually, I don't think this R marking is very readable. Like, you can see it in this angle, it's barely visible, and I would have preferred like somewhere in color marking here, or at least in something better readable than this R. It just, if you just look at the IEM, you can't see it, and if you have a cable that also does not have color coding, can be a bit difficult. And then there's another pressure hole near the R here. It's a bit smaller than the one on top, and I do not see a mesh here protecting the insides. But it's a bit smaller, and it's on the inside. I don't think that's an issue. And last but not least, when we talk about build, let's take a look at the nozzle here. As you can see, the nozzle is relatively short, but the shell is kind of ergonomic shaped, so that shouldn't be any problem for anybody. And on top we have this like shiny metal grill here. And I'm not sure how well it's visible here. No, this is not ear gunk around the outermost layer of holes. That actually is the glue that keeps the plate here connected with the nozzle. So I'm not a great fan of that, but it looks to be well integrated. As you can see, it's like very flush on here, and with the amount of glue that we can even see here, I highly doubt that it will fall off over time. So overall I do like the build quality of this one, and because I think it's stainless steel or aluminium. I think it's aluminium, but it's rather thick aluminium, so it's a weighty boy. If you have it in your hand here, it feels well made, and I actually like the build quality of this thing in general. Okay, then after we took a look at the IEM build, let's take a look at the cable. And to summarize quickly here, I did like the IEM build here. It feels very well made, it feels sturdy, and I do not see any issues with it in the most near future. Also, I did not have any condensation issues, which did happen to me with the triple win metal IEMs. Here it didn't, so you should be good in terms of condensation here. Okay, now let's take a look at the cable. And before we take a look at the connectors, to go case, you're not important at the moment. Let's start at the top this time. So we flip it around. As you can see here, this is relatively smooth. I just thrust in here, wrapped around, and it gets straight relatively easily. So I like that already about the top part of the cable. And if you take a look at the diameter here, it also seems to be a very similar diameter. Maybe a tad smaller, but generally this on top here feels smooth, it feels sturdy. This feels like a well-made cable at the top, and the chin slider actually does move up and down, and it stays in place. Maybe it's a bit too difficult to move, but it definitely stays in place, so I will give them that. And unlike with, for instance, the Dioko, which you can't move a chin slider at all, here it can, and I don't think it will damage the cable. Just want to say it could be a tiny bit more loose, but that's basically it. And then let's take a quick look at the ear hooks. And these are relatively thick rubberized. I'm not sure how that's visible in camera. This is thick rubber. And this then means that the cable here is pretty springy. Even if I use the heavier side as spring mount, you can see it's springy, all right. And there's a small issue, at least with the unit I have here, because it slightly bent outwards like that, the cable, when it arrived here. So I tried to bend it in like this for a couple dozen times and hope that it will kind of fold inwards so I don't lose it over my ears. Unfortunately, but I probably need to use some heat in order to really bend it to its rightful place. But I don't want to do that because it's borrowed from a friend. So I will not do it, but just saying, I think they should watch out that if you have a thick rubberization, this should be bent slightly inwards so you don't lose it over your ears. Yeah, and then let's take a quick look at the connector. As you can see, it's a metal cylinder around here. There's an L and R on here. The L and R again is not enough color contrast in my opinion. It's like white on like metal silver background. Could be a bit better. And it also lacks color coding, as you can see here. So I prefer at least like a red marker or red dot at the right side, so I don't need to look for the L and R in detail. But yeah, last point here about the top of the cable. As you can see, this is for flush cables or like a flush 2-pin connector. So you probably cannot use it for all of your other IEMs, but generally it should be fine for most, because most IEMs do work with flush 2-pin or do not have a recessed 2-pin, so it should be okay. And generally it feels well made here. Like I have no issue with the build quality at the top. Then let's take a look at the splitter. It follows this silver style here, which is like reflective, and here, see it again. It's basically the same color, so that's nice to see. But I'm not sure if they found the right contrast for the light blue it has. Because we follow the cable down here, you can see it's 4 thicker strands, and again, this is getting smooth relatively fast. I like it. This is what I want about a cable. Sturdy, thicker strands, still smooth. That's how it should be, and it absolutely is better than, for instance, the cable of the Variations or the AJ07M, and probably of quite a few other expensive IEMs that come with not so great cables. So let's take a quick look in detail here. You can see the individual strands in the bigger strands here. Doesn't do anything to sound, but hey, it definitely looks unique, and also the like light blue color here is something I don't think I've seen in another IEM cable so far. So at least that's unique, and I do applaud them for at least attempting to be unique. And then at the bottom we have a thick ass plug here with a strain release that again doesn't release any strain, like seriously none. This is hard plastic, and so it can't release any strain physically, and it's so short. Again, it doesn't do anything, and if you do strain release, like please make it usable. Like, why is this so difficult? Why does no IEM company get this right? Like, strain release does help your IEM to survive longer. Just make it work. And yeah, and at the bottom, interchangeable connector. As you can see here, interchangeable connector. And yeah, we take a look at the ends we get. We do get 3.5, 4.4, and 2.5, and I will just remove whatever ending I grab first. And no, this is not blue, as I noticed. This is just the protective casing around here, which my friend did not remove, so I also won't do either. But beneath that, it will keep this silver color here. And I think they should be better off with maybe like black, or yeah, color-wise maybe in dark blue. I don't think silver is the best choice here, but what is a good choice, I do like that they have like texture here so you can actually grip it. That is really nice, and also here is nice to see that it has texture. However, if you are having like small devices and you want smaller footprint of your things, this is definitively a thick ass connector here. And yeah, might not be for everyone, but I like it. I like my things to be more sturdy and a bit thicker, especially at the cable. So maybe not your cup of tea, but I personally like it. And that basically brings me to the summary of cable. I also think this cable is well made, and I like it for this price point especially. And yeah, I think I could also set it like it is. Like, it's good cable, and I don't have too many complaints with it. Okay, so then after we took a look at the cable and the IEM, let's talk about comfort and fit. And as usual, I will be throwing on measurements of the IEM so you can see how long, how wide, how thick, and how every of the other dimensions is that you can possibly imagine, or what would be important to you. And yeah, the Heyday definitely is on the bigger side of IEMs. I will most likely compare it in this chapter to the P1 Max, because they generally follow a very similar shaping. I will show you comparisons between those two, obviously, so you can see for yourself. But yeah, they both have this kind of slightly oval, bit of boat shape to them. And the big difference between the Heyday and the P1 Max though is that the Heyday actually is ergonomically shaped. That means it has kind of the shape of your outer pinna, which obviously makes it superior in terms of fit compared to the P1 Max. And what the Heyday also does have over the P1 Max with an, yes, it's a generally similar shaping. The P1 Max has a kind of corner to it. Wait, again, we're throwing here just live video where I pointed it. The corner is like in the bottom of the IEM, like where you would usually put it directly in your pinna. There's a kind of corner, and that does hit your ear. Like, I think it's best visible in this angle here, this corner where this corner will hit your outer ear if you try to get a deep insertion. And that gets uncomfortable after like relatively medium amounts of time. On the other hand though, if we look at the Heyday here, it's corner free. Like, there's no corner that could make your outer ear somewhat stressed, and that overall leads to a much more comfortable experience if you want to get a relatively deep insertion, which you can, because I just showed it on a video here. This IEM definitely is ergonomic shaped, and the shell actually does extrude in a way that would fit your outer pinna well. And that means with most tips I tried on here that actually fit the nozzle, which we'll talk about next, you will get a really good fit with it, and it will be pretty comfortable for basically extended amounts of time. Like, you could wear this all day without any issue. But a small issue, the nozzle. It's really thick. The nozzle, the lip here, which I will be pointing out, the lip here is 6.4 millimeter in diameter. That is really wide, and basically it's the same as the variations. But because it's only the lip, and directly behind it is only, what did I measure? I think like 5.5 millimeters in width or something. It doesn't come off as wide in your ear if you actually have a tip on. It's still pretty wide, and if I get like more, like want to say, like not so pliable tips, it's not easy to fit your favorite tips on if your tips are not so pliable, but generally it will stay because, yeah, the nozzle or the lip is pretty thick, and yeah, will get pretty comfortable if you get your favorite tip on. And yeah, for me these are SS tips, and basically all SS tips I try to throw on here also fit on. Again, something like the Final E are a bit difficult because they are a bit more like sturdy on the inside, but I did manage to get them on here, and yeah, they stayed in place just fine due to a thick lip. So yeah, overall, I would say TANGZU did a good job of this one. I like the shaping of this. It stays in my ear very well. It stays comfortable. And yeah, I don't have too many complaints here. Besides maybe even also like make that a millimeter smaller or so, but it's totally fine. And nozzle length is also relatively short. That combined with the the ergonomic shape of the IEM makes it really good in general. And then next chapter, isolation, and yeah, similar to the P1 Max, there's 12, or basically all other planars I've looked at so far. The companies don't even give you like official isolation values, like that are measured in a laboratory, of course, but still they would be more hard data than me just telling you how I feel, how well they isolate. So yeah, you fortunately have to live with my subjective measurement, or my subjective here, because I also lack the tools to actually measure it. So yeah, in general, this is a metal shell. It is relatively heavy and it is relatively thick. And combine that with the ergonomic shaping generally, the Heyday does isolate pretty well, and I would definitively take it all day of the week over P1 Max here, which does not isolate as good as this one. Also helping with that obviously is that you can get the Heyday here deeper inserted, so that means obviously it will be better off in blocking most frequencies. But yeah, even if you don't insert it as deep, just because the shell is thicker, the shell is metal, it's more dense, it will isolate better than the P1 Max, for instance. And overall, I think it is probably better isolating than also the S12, which is not as ergonomic shaped, but also still very well shaped, and you can insert it really deep. Still, I think this one has thicker metal and it just isolates a bit better than the S12, but not a lot, just a bit. So that means overall it is a good isolating IEM, and it will bring you for all of your life basically. Doesn't matter if it's in the office, at home, on the way to work or so. It's totally fine. You shouldn't have any difficulties with isolation in any situation. Next, drivability, and yeah, very similar to the Yoko P1 Max. All of the other planars, it has an 16 ohms of resistance with 98 decibels at 1 kilohertz. So it's on the spec sheet, it measures like on the spec sheet, it measures like similar to all of the others, and In reality, it also means, yeah, it's relatively easy to drive. You can just use your Apple dongle or whatever other random dongle you want to use. Is totally sufficient. You don't really get much more if you up the power. So I tried it on a random USB-C dongle. I have the USB-C Apple dongle. I tried it on my laptop. I tried even on PC onboard audio of my PC, which isn't great, so won't recommend that. Just because, yeah, audio itself on the onboard audio is not good. But as soon as it's clean enough, like the dongles, it's totally fine. And if I up the power and the cleanness in quotes a bit, or like the BTR5, the UP5, or some other more expensive dongles, maybe it got a tad better. So I think the staging got improved a bit, maybe the tightness of bass. But generally, you don't need to worry about amplification with this one. Just use whatever dongle you have and you get, if we say like conservatively, maybe 85% of what this IEM is capable of with your random dongle. So yeah. Then next, let's talk about sound. And I will throw on a measurement here. Again, it's done with IEC 7.1 coupler. And I will compare it to basically most of the other planars that I have measured so far and I have tried, besides the PMV PP, because that is just old news and it also reversed off the bunch in terms of tuning. So let's not talk about the PP. And yeah, general sound characteristics. This is certainly a V-shaped IEM, like mildly, or as you would say, tastefully V-shaped IEM. Has certain cues from Harman target as well integrated. And yeah, generally is very tasteful V-shape. And I'll be starting off the sound analysis as usual with Treble Extension. And similar to the other planars I have had so far, it has some good extension, certainly reaches past 10K, maybe even like 17K or whatever. Like it reaches far enough that you do get most air frequencies. And also unlike with Yoko, for instance, which has like a plateau around 10K and after that, yeah, the Heyday definitely does not have a big plateau like this. So that means it comes off generally in the upper treble as more natural, as more like tamed down, while still having air. So if you have like string instruments or bigger orchestras, it will still feel like bigger. It will be like, yeah, there's more like pizzazz to the instruments than some of the cheaper dynamic IEMs. Let's take a quick look at the measurement. Again, this is kind of Harman stylish tuned, like it's not exactly Harman, but it follows the Harman guideline here, which has a dip around like 6 to 8K, something like that, and then it rises again, and then yeah, it just slowly slopes off. And Harman IEM talking about here, obviously. And yeah, this means in my examples, Ovan's multivitamin juice part 1 and 2 worked very well. Instruments had nice trailing ends and nice leading edges. There was good air, it felt like it had good resolution. And yeah, while I think Yoko might be better with just the pure air feeling, it definitely does come off as more boosted and more unnatural. The Heyday does follow a much more natural trend here. And then we go to Mid-Treble. And yeah, there isn't a dip again around like 7.5 to like 8 kilohertz. This can, again, because there's a rise after that for most pinars or for most ears, this should make it not uncomfortable because there shouldn't be any sibilance. But again, because there's a rise after that, if your channel is just like weirdly shaped or not as mine or as the coupler would indicate, you can get sibilance out of it because when the peak at around like 9K can shift to 8K. For me though, this did not happen. I did not get an 8K peak, so I didn't have any sibilance here. And that means combined with the like rise at like 9K, you do have a good sizzle and splash. A-guitars have a good bite to them. And generally it worked for most or like all of my library, like Metallica, Iron Maiden, Variapath, Linkin Park, you name it, everything worked well. And then going a bit further down, you just have to go to lower treble and upper mids. And yeah, there's a plateau from like 2.5 to 4K, slightly downward sloped. And that generally means it has a really nice tonality to them. It comes off as a bit more energetic than neutral, which you can see in the comparison to with Yoko, which follows like kind of neutral in this region. And yeah, this means it will be a bit more sparkly, a bit more pleasant to listen to if you're not so sensitive to this region. And for me, this means most of my library, again, worked very well. And I liked the vocalist in Nier Automata, for instance, like Weight of the World is a concrete song here. But also the vocalist in Never Fade Away from the Cyberpunk 77 soundtrack worked very well, had good tonality, good clarity, and I don't have anything to complain here. The balance here is done in a very good way. I don't think it gets shouty or unpleasant in any way here, it just is very well tuned. And then let's quickly come to the mids. And yeah, as I said, I think with the P1 Max, these mids are very well defined. We have a nice presentation to them and good clarity, and they just sound good. And there's a slight gain from like 800 Hz, or slight gain from 850 to 150 Hz, which is almost identical to the P1 Max there. So in practical, that means if you go to the lower mids, you do have more energy here. Bass guitars come off as a bit more full, a bit more bodied, and lower pitched male vocals also come off as having a bit more energy, sounding a bit more friendly, not friendly, but more pleasant overall. And yeah, for me, that also means I'm totally fine here, generally because the quality of the driver is also good, so you don't get the muddiness in the lower mids that you get with some of the mainstream headphones. And yeah, this means, again, I could name a few artists. Eli Arson worked very well here. It's like a synthwave-ish style with like a bit of rock elements to them. Bullet for My Valentine also worked really well. And Masayoshi Takanaka, sorry if I pronounced that wrong, also worked very well. And I literally had no complaints in the mids and the low mids as well. Like, just worked flawlessly. And the only thing that I could see, if you're not a fan of a bit more warmth added to your mids, this could be a point of criticism if you like really flat mids, but for instance, the variations would have, or also the AJ07M. This could be a point of criticism for you, but with this implementation, yeah, totally fine. I have no criticisms, and it just sounded all right for me, like no complaints. Next, let's talk about bass, and yeah, to most part, the Heyday is pretty much identical to what you get with the P1 Max. So yeah, you do have a decent amount of upper bass without having too much mud there. You do have a good punch in the mid bass. The biggest difference when it comes to the sub bass, where the Heyday straight up just better, just has more energy, and it definitively does overall then work in its favor, because yeah, the bass comes off as more full overall. So yeah, in terms of quality, I don't think we have to talk about it. It's planar driver like the others. It has a really good quality there. Does not come off as muddy or as blunted or anything. And generally, I do like what I hear. Like, has a good punch to it. It has a good kick also. And if you get on something more like bassy, or like my examples would be like synthwave. Kavinsky, for instance, worked great. It had a good kick to them and good clarity, and I definitely liked the way the bass line was handled in most of the stuff. So example tracks here would be Pulsar or Renegade, very enjoyable in terms of mid to like upper to mid to sub bass, very good, and I don't have any complaints here. However, I want to complain about sub bass a tiny bit, because if you look at this graph, you do think there's a good amount, or like good sub bass in general, which there is energy, yes, but its biggest weakness of the Heyday, I think, is the way how the sub bass is textured. Because similar to the P1 Max, I don't think this is really good for sub bass heavy tracks. Yes, there is, according to graph, good energy here, but if you have tracks that demand more texture of your sub bass, like Interstellar, the soundtrack here, Mountains, for instance, a specific track, it has a really low bass note that kind of fluctuates there, and it reaches like 2 minutes 16 in this track. And yeah, Heyday manages like 2:15 maybe. It isn't really textured at that point no more. So I think similar to the P1 Max, it is generally sounding good, but just in terms of quality, the sub bass is not its strong point. Like, don't get me wrong, you still get energy there, and you do have still the feeling of rumble, and generally it sounds more full than the P1 Max. But just the quality you have in sub bass is not the best, and I've heard Dynamics doing quite a bit better than this one, also at this price point. Then next, Soundstage, layering, and imaging, and I will be mostly doing AB to the Yoko and P1 Max here, because these are the last planers I've heard. And yeah, generally I think Soundstage is pretty good on this one. It's not the widest or not the biggest I've heard, but it is good, and I think it beats the P1 Max in, yeah, maybe width, and similar to the Yoko in terms of height, I think. So it has a good soundstage for an IEM, and yeah, I didn't have too much complaints here. Layering, most of the time you get 3 to 5 layers, similar to P1 Max, but I think the average goes more in direction like more than 3, but they're not mega precisely defined, and you can definitely find other IEMs that do layer better at this price point. But generally it's fine, like it's not just 3 blobs as other IEMs do. You do definitively get still a few layers, like a feeling of layers in between there. And imaging, yeah, similar to P1 Max, they're pretty much equal. Like, they do image well, you can place instruments in the room, like here and there, and maybe a bit up or down, is placeable pretty well. I don't think it's best imaging though, again. Like, you can absolutely game with this, especially because they are tuned, so like naturally they just feel alright. And yeah, because imaging is also not bad, it's good. You won't have any difficulties. Just for gaming, I'm not the most certain here. Maybe you just want also a bit more treble energy generally, because that will give you better placement of footsteps most of the time. And then last but not least, before we come to the verdict, let's talk about separation, dynamics, and coherence. And yeah, this IEM is also well separating due to it being a pretty good driver, probably the same or very similar one to all of the other planars out there. And I did not have any difficulty separating instrument lines with this one. And again, just per graph, there definitely is bleed in quotes from bass to the mids. So this can maybe, if you are very picky, make some instrument lines a bit blunted there. But I didn't have this difficulty, and for basically all of my like benchmark tracks, it worked very well. And I didn't have any difficulties, yeah, picking, for instance, bass guitars and lower pitched vocals apart. But again, if you are picky, maybe you could complain there just because, yeah, the tuning is not so clean in quotes. But I didn't have any problems here, just want to say that. Dynamics, on the other hand, yeah, I did like the dynamics here. I would describe them as good. Definitely quite a bit of step up from Dioko, which struggled with macro dynamics in my opinion. This one definitely does have that. And I also think it edges out the P1 Max, which does at least come out somewhat close in most of its frequency range, if you just look at the graph. So yeah, this is generally a good dynamic planar IEM, and I don't have any complaints about micro or macro dynamics here. They are both done pretty well. And yeah, that brings me to coherence and timbre. Yeah, coherence is very good. Again, it's one driver only, so you don't have to worry about mids sounding different than treble or bass. But I think one of the best things about the Heyday is that overall it sounds so organic. There's no metallic shimmer on top. Even the plasticky, or like not a plasticky, like the pluggedness of planars isn't as present as I have heard them with the others. So I really would say this is almost giving you the feeling of a good dynamic. Like almost, because dynamic still maybe a bit more dynamic. More dynamic, haha. And maybe can still sound a bit more natural, but yeah, this one sounds really natural, and I like the way this one, yeah, is presented over all of its spectrum. And I would say so far this is the best coherent and the best, yeah, the best timbred, is this a word in English? I don't know. Best timbred planar I have tried, and for that alone I would already recommend it. And that brings me now to the verdict. Because I've said many positive things in this review, and you would expect that I give this a really positive or really high recommendation, where just I put up my flag and say, yeah, this is the best IEM ever. And yes, but no, because the Heyday, while looking good, being well built, having a nice cable, sounding very good, is kind of double what you would pay, even more than double, for the P1 Max, for instance. And I don't think it is worth double. It is better tuned, certainly. It does overall sound better. It gives you better accessories, yes. But is it twice as good as P1 Max, for instance, or as Dioko? And here I would say no. Like, it is a bit better just because it's better tuned. But generally, I don't think it delivers much more technicality than the others. And yeah, for that alone, like having similar technicalities but charging twice as much, just good accessories and good fit, not really worth it if you're already fine with the other planars. For instance, S12 for sale can be had sometimes for I think like $100 or like 90-ish, something like that. And for that, I would absolutely get the S12 just because it has even like similar quality accessories and good casing. And yeah, it just not as natural sounding, yes, absolutely, and a bit more V-shaped, certainly. But generally, I don't think this delivers much more than, yeah, the other planars on the market, with the exception it just being so well tuned that maybe you do want to spend double. I would probably not. And again, I want to thank my friend for borrowing me this one here. Certainly nice to listen to it. And I think if you are in the market for just one IEM, just one, and you want something that is around like 100 to 200, I would certainly say Heyday is absolutely worth a recommendation there. But if you are fine with basically, let's say, 85% of what Heyday offers, P1 Max is a good alternative. You don't have the best fit because there's an edge in the shell here. The accessory is not as good. But if you just grab a good pair of tips and you are not, you don't want the deepest insertion with the P1 Max, I think it's a good alternative. And I would probably myself choose the P1 Max over the Heyday, just because there's like twice as much in expanses here than there's from a P1 Max. And yeah, that concludes my review here. I hope you enjoyed it. If you have feedback, if you have criticisms, if you have other IEM recommendations or anything else, please let me know in the comments. And with this, Donspektor out.